there is a question that should unsettle you more than it does. You will spend approximately 1/3 of your entire life unconscious, not resting, not daydreaming, not sitting quietly with your eyes closed, unconscious, unreachable, gone from the world in a way so complete that a person standing beside you could call your name. And for long stretches of those hours, nothing in you would register that sound as something requiring a response. 1/3. If you live to 80, that is more than 26 years spent in a state you cannot remember, cannot control, and cannot observe from the inside. 26 years of your life will happen in a room with the lights off, behind a door you cannot open from either side. And yet here is the part that should strike you as extraordinary. You return from it every morning. You return changed, repaired, consolidated. The memories you made the day before have been sorted and filed. The emotional weight of yesterday's difficult conversations has been processed and, in most cases, quietly reduced. The proteins that build your immune response have been manufactured and deployed. The metabolic waste that accumulated in your brain during 16 hours of thinking has been flushed away. Your muscles have been repaired at the cellular level. Your hormones have been recalibrated. Your nervous system has been reset. All of this happened while you were nowhere. Where exactly is nowhere? Where do you go when you sleep? What is actually happening in the architecture of those dark hours? Not in the vague, hand-waving sense, but in the specific, measurable, deeply surprising sense that modern neuroscience has spent decades uncovering. That is what tonight's journey is about. We are going to travel through the night together. We are going to trace the precise path that your brain takes from the moment you close your eyes to the moment the morning pulls you back. We are going to go into the stages of sleep one by one, not as dry clinical categories, but as territories, each with its own atmosphere, its own purpose, its own strangeness. We are going to look at what the brain actually does in the deep hours. We are going to meet the glymphatic system, the brain's extraordinary self-cleaning mechanism, which only activates when you are fully, deeply unconscious. We are going to look at why REM sleep is one of the most electrically active states the brain ever enters, and why losing it costs you more than you might imagine. And as we trace this path, something else may happen. The journey itself may begin to carry you. The description of sleep, moving through you in the dark, may become the thing it describes. The architecture of the night, laid out in words, may become the architecture your own mind begins to inhabit. So before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe if this kind of journey is something you value. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I find it remarkable every single time to think about how many people from how many different corners of the world are making this crossing together. Now, turn off what you can, let the room settle, let your body find its weight, and let's go into the dark, the threshold. Every night, you cross a threshold that has no physical form and leaves no mark. It is the most ordinary, extraordinary thing that human beings do. One moment, you are here, aware, processing. The world has texture and weight and demand. Thoughts arrive with force and purpose. Your sense of self, the continuous, narrating, identity-maintaining quality of your consciousness, is fully present, holding everything together, making sense of the incoming stream, and then not suddenly, not with a clear boundary, you are not here anymore. The thread of self goes slack, the narrating stops. maintenance of the world inside your head quietly ceases. This is not nothing. It is not simply the absence of waking. Sleep is an active, structured, purposeful state, one of the most complex things the brain ever does. What looks from the outside like stillness and silence is, on the inside, a cascade of precisely orchestrated biological events, moving through defined stages in a specific sequence, governed by systems of extraordinary sophistication. Scientists began to understand this in the early 1950s, when a young researcher named Eugene Aserinsky, working in the sleep laboratory of Nathaniel Kleitman at the University of Chicago, noticed something strange happening to his sleeping subjects. Their eyes were moving, rapidly, persistently, side to side, beneath closed lids, as though following something that only they could see. He wired them to an electroencephalograph, a machine that measures the electrical activity of the brain, and what he found changed sleep science permanently. The sleeping brain was not quiet. It was not idling. During these periods of rapid eye movement, the brain's electrical activity looked almost identical to the brain of a person who was awake and actively engaged with the world. The stage that Aserinsky had stumbled upon, which would come to be known as REM sleep, would eventually be understood as one of the most important and mysterious phases of human existence. But REM is not where the night begins. To understand the full architecture, we have to start at the beginning. We have to start at the threshold. Stage 1, the loosening. You are lying down. The day is behind you. The demands, the decisions, the accumulated weight of being a person in the world, all of it is beginning to recede, not yet gone, but stepping back from the foreground. Your eyes are closed. Your muscles are beginning, almost imperceptibly, to soften. This is stage 1 sleep, the lightest stage, the anteroom, the corridor between two different ways of being. In terms of brain activity, stage 1 is characterized by a shift from the beta waves of active waking fast, high frequency, alert to the slower, lower frequency alpha waves of relaxed wakefulness. And then, as stage 1 deepens, into the even slower theta waves that mark the beginning of genuine sleep, the same theta frequency, incidentally, that the developing brain of an infant produces during its waking hours, absorbing the world in its state of unguarded receptivity. Stage 1 typically lasts between 5 and 10 minutes. It is the lightest of all sleep stages, so light that if you were awakened from it, you might insist, with complete sincerity, that you had not been asleep at all. You might feel certain that you were simply resting, that your eyes happened to be closed, but the EEG tells a different story. The brain has already begun its departure. There is a phenomenon that many people experience during stage 1, in the earliest minutes of this transition, that is one of the strangest and most universal aspects of human sleep. You may be familiar with it. You are drifting, relaxed, beginning to loosen your grip on the waking world, when suddenly a jolt, a violent, involuntary muscle contraction, typically in the legs but sometimes throughout the entire body, that snaps you back to wakefulness, with your heart briefly racing and the vivid impression of having slipped or fallen. This is called a hypnic jerk, and while it has been studied for decades, its precise purpose remains not entirely clear. One leading theory is evolutionary. As the brain begins the process of disengaging from conscious control of the body's muscle tone during the transition to sleep, it briefly misinterprets the relaxation of the muscles as the beginning of a fall. It fires a reflex, a ghost of the ancient survival response that would have caught a sleeping primate. before it tumbled from its tree branch, only to find that there is no fall to catch. You are not falling. You were never falling. The body was simply letting go, and some ancient part of the brain mistook the letting go for danger. It is a relic of another time, running in the same machinery that will, in a few minutes, begin one of the most sophisticated biological processes in the known universe. Stage 1 is also the territory of hypnagogia, the state of the threshold that we touched on in our last journey together. In these early minutes of sleep, the boundary between the waking and dreaming mind becomes porous. Fragments of imagery appear, unbidden and often strange. A face that belongs to no one you know, a phrase of music that has no source, the sensation of moving through a space that does not exist. These are not dreams in the full sense. They are drafts, sketches, the first unstructured outputs of a dreaming system warming up its engines. Some of the most remarkable creative insights in human history have emerged from this threshold state. Salvador Dalí famously cultivated it deliberately, napping in a chair with a key in his hand so that the clatter of its falling as he drifted into sleep would retrieve him from the hypnagogic zone with its strange imagery intact. Thomas Edison did the same with a handful of ball bearings. The mathematician Poincaré, the inventor Tesla, the novelist Stevenson, all described significant discoveries or creative solutions arriving at exactly this threshold in the first soft moments of sleep, before the full architecture of the night had taken hold. The brain at the edge of sleep is not yet bound by the rules of the waking world. Its associative networks are beginning to run free of the executive control that ordinarily constrains them. Connections are being made between things that the logical mind would have kept separate. This is not noise. This is the first sign of the extraordinary creative and processing work that the sleeping brain is about to undertake. But it is only the beginning. The real architecture lies deeper. Stage 2, the descent stage 2, is where sleep becomes sleep. If stage 1 is the corridor, stage 2 is the room. It is a genuine, measurable, distinct state of unconsciousness, one that takes up more of your total sleep time than any other single stage. Over the course of a full night, you will spend approximately 50% of your sleeping hours here. It is the backbone of the night's architecture. On the EEG, stage 2 looks different from anything that comes before or after it. The slow theta waves of stage 1 are periodically interrupted by two distinctive and remarkable electrical events. The first is called a sleep spindle, a sudden, brief burst of high-frequency brain activity that appears as a sharp, dense cluster on the EEG trace, lasting typically between half a second and 2 seconds, occurring several times per minute. The second is called a K-complex, a large, sudden, dramatic wave that spikes sharply upward and then plunges down, appearing on the EEG like the profile of a mountain range. A single, isolated event occurring every minute or so, standing out against the quieter background of stage 2 sleep. Both of these features were noticed by early sleep researchers and puzzled over for decades. What were they for? Why did the sleeping brain produce these sudden, coordinated electrical bursts? The emerging understanding, built from decades of research, is that sleep spindles are intimately involved in the consolidation of memory. Specifically, the transfer of newly acquired information from the hippocampus, the brain's temporary short-term storage system, to the cortex, where memories are encoded for long-term keeping. Each sleep spindle appears to represent a burst of communication between these two regions. a rapid upload of information from the hippocampal buffer to the more permanent storage of the cortical networks. Studies have shown that people who generate more sleep spindles during stage 2, whether due to genetics or to the particular demands of their day, score significantly better on tests of memory the following morning. The spindles are not random electrical noise. They are data transfer events. They are the brain filing its papers. The K complex, meanwhile, appears to serve a different but equally important function. It seems to be the brain's mechanism for suppressing arousal, for actively maintaining the sleeping state against the constant background of potential disturbances. When a sound in the environment begins to register in the sleeping brain, a K complex fires, effectively damping the signal before it can reach the level needed to produce waking. The K complex is the night's doorman. It assesses incoming signals and, in most cases, turns them away without disturbing the sleeper. There is something remarkable about this. The sleeping brain in stage 2 is not simply passive, not simply switched off and waiting for morning. It is actively monitoring the environment, actively assessing incoming information, actively suppressing arousal, and simultaneously actively transferring memories. It is working on multiple fronts at once, in a state of carefully calibrated unconsciousness. The body, meanwhile, is undergoing its own changes. Core temperature drops, having already begun its descent in the hours before sleep began. Heart rate slows. Breathing becomes regular and unhurried. The muscular tension that the body carries through the waking day, the held jaw, the tightened shoulders, the braced lower back begins, muscle group by muscle group, to release. The body is doing what the mind has already done, letting go of its day. Stage 2 is where many brief daytime naps end, and it is why the brief nap is often so refreshing. 15 to 20 minutes of stage 2 sleep, without descending into the deeper stages that produce significant sleep inertia upon waking, delivers a real and measurable boost to alertness, mood, and cognitive performance. NASA research on military pilots found that a short nap improved performance by 34% and alertness by 100%, not because anything dramatic happened neurologically, simply because stage 2 sleep had been allowed to do its quiet, efficient work. But stage 2, remarkable as it is only the approach to the deepest place. Stage 3. The deep stage 3 sleep is called slow wave sleep, or SWS. It is also sometimes called delta sleep, after the slow, large amplitude brainwaves, delta waves, that characterize it. And it is, by many measures, the most physically restorative sleep of the human body experiences. The delta waves of stage 3 are profoundly different in character from anything that came before. They are enormous, the largest waves the brain produces, and they are slow, cycling at a rate of between half a cycle and 4 cycles per second. Where the rapid spindles of stage 2 represent a nervous system in active processing, these slow, rolling waves represent something else entirely, a state of deep, synchronized, coordinated rest. To understand what delta waves represent, consider what they physically are. An EEG wave is a measure of the synchronized electrical activity of millions of neurons. A high-amplitude, low-frequency delta wave means that vast populations of neurons are firing together in the same rhythm at the same time, not in the rapid, complex, individuated firing patterns of waking cognition, where different neurons are responding to different aspects of the environment and sending different signals to different destinations. In deep sleep, the brain is doing something closer to coordinated breathing. Everything is moving together, slowly, in the same direction. This synchronized, slow-wave state has profound effects on the body. Growth hormone, the hormone primarily responsible for cellular repair, tissue growth, and the physical restoration of muscle and bone, is released in significant quantities during slow-wave sleep. The largest single pulse of growth hormone that your body produces occurs, not randomly, but almost exclusively during the first episode of slow-wave sleep of the night, typically in the first 90 minutes after you fall asleep. If you are robbed of that first block of deep sleep, you are robbed of that pulse of growth hormone and the cascade of physical repair that depends upon it. The immune system, too, receives particular support during slow-wave sleep. Certain immune proteins, cytokines, among others, are produced and released at elevated levels during deep sleep. Sleep deprivation, particularly deprivation of stage 3 sleep, is associated with measurable suppression of immune function within days and with significantly elevated susceptibility to infection. The 1988 Carnegie Mellon study that exposed participants to the common cold virus found that those who slept less than 7 hours were nearly 3 times more likely to develop a cold than those who slept 8 hours or more. The numbers are stark. The mechanism runs straight through stage 3. But the discovery that has most transformed scientific and public understanding of deep sleep in recent years has nothing to do with growth hormone or immune function. It has to do with cleaning, specifically with the washing of the brain. The glymphatic system, the brain's secret janitor. For most of modern medical history, the brain was considered unique among the body's major organs in one particular respect. Every other organ in the body has a lymphatic system, a network of vessels that runs parallel to the blood supply, draining away the waste products of cellular metabolism and ferrying them to the liver and kidneys for processing and elimination. The lymphatic system is the body's sewage network. It keeps the internal environment clean. The brain, for reasons that seem to have to do with the need to maintain the extremely precise chemical environment required for neural function, was thought to lack this system. It was assumed to manage its waste products through other, less efficient mechanisms. This was accepted. It was taught in textbooks. It was one of the foundational assumptions of neuroscience for generations. In 2012, a neuroscientist named Mike Nedergaard at the University of Rochester published a paper that upended this assumption so completely that its reverberations are still being felt throughout medicine today. Nedergaard and her team had been studying the brain's glial cells, the supporting cells that surround and sustain the neurons, long considered relatively passive infrastructure compared to the glamorous, signal-firing neurons themselves. What they found was that the glial cells, specifically a type called astrocytes, were not passive at all. They were doing something extraordinary. They were running a plumbing system. Around each blood vessel in the brain, the astrocytes form a tight sheath, a channel. When the brain is active and awake, these channels are relatively narrow. But during sleep, and specifically during deep, slow-wave sleep, something changes. The astrocytes contract, they shrink, and as they shrink, the channels around the blood vessels expand dramatically by approximately 60% into this expanded space. Cerebrospinal fluid, the clear liquid that bathes the brain and spinal cord, begins to flow, not to trickle, but to pulse. The heartbeat drives waves of cerebrospinal fluid through the now widened channels between and around the neurons. washing through the tissue in a rhythmic flood, and as it flows, it carries away the metabolic waste products that have accumulated during the day's neural activity. Among the waste products carried away is amyloid beta, the same protein that, when it accumulates in abnormal quantities in the spaces between neurons, forms the plaques that are one of the characteristic features of Alzheimer's disease. Also cleared is tau protein, another molecule associated with Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions when it accumulates and misfolds. Also cleared are a host of other metabolic byproducts, the molecular exhaust of a brain that has been thinking and feeling and processing and reacting for 16 or more waking hours. Nadergaard called this system the glymphatic system, a portmanteau of glial and lymphatic. It is the brain's lymphatic system, operating through a mechanism entirely unlike that of the rest of the body, but serving the same essential function, cleaning up the mess. And here is the critical finding that makes this discovery so urgent, so practically important, so directly relevant to the hours you are spending in the dark right now. The glymphatic system is almost entirely inactive during waking. Its cleaning operation requires the 60% expansion of the channels around the blood vessels. That expansion requires the contraction of the astrocytes, and that contraction, the research suggests, is gated by sleep, specifically by the slow, synchronized, coordinated electrical activity of deep sleep. The delta waves of stage 3 are not merely a sign of deep sleep. They appear to be part of the mechanism that drives the glymphatic cleaning. The slow oscillations of deep sleep create the conditions under which the brain can wash itself. Without sufficient deep sleep, the glymphatic system does not fully activate. The day's neural waste accumulates. Amyloid beta is not cleared. Night after night of insufficient deep sleep is associated in epidemiological study after epidemiological study with elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease, sometimes showing risk increases of 50 to 60% in those who chronically sleep 6 hours or less compared to those who sleep 8. This is not correlation without mechanism. The mechanism is the glymphatic system. The mechanism is the washing of the brain that only happens in the deep, dark, slow-wave hours of sleep that you are, right now, preparing to enter. There is something almost overwhelming about this discovery. The brain, the organ that makes you everything you are, that holds every memory, every relationship, every capacity, every skill, every version of yourself you have ever been, is spending roughly 20 to 25% of your sleep time cleaning itself of the very metabolic waste that its own activity produces. It has a janitorial system that works the night shift, that cannot begin its work until the consciousness it serves has stepped out of the building. Sleep is not passive rest. Sleep is maintenance, and the maintenance requires you to leave. The architecture of the 90-minute cycle. Before we move into the most electrically alive stage of all, we need to step back and look at the broader architecture of the night. Sleep does not move through its stages in a single, linear descent and ascent. It does not simply go from light to deep and back to light. The architecture is cyclical. The brain moves through a repeating pattern across the night, each cycle lasting approximately 90 minutes. And understanding this 90-minute cycle is one of the most practically useful things you can know about sleep. A typical cycle works as follows. You enter stage 1, the threshold. You move quickly through into stage 2, the backbone of sleep. You descend into stage 3, the deep, slow wave, restorative dark. Rather than simply ascending back to waking, you move into something entirely different, something that the EEG reveals to be unlike anything that came before in the night. You enter REM. After REM, the cycle begins again, back through the lighter stages, down into deep sleep, back up into REM. 90 minutes, 90 minutes, across the full night's architecture. But here is the crucial detail that most people do not know. The proportion of deep sleep and REM sleep within each cycle is not uniform across the night. It changes dramatically. In the early cycles, the first 2 or 3, which encompass the first 4 to 5 hours of sleep, the cycles are heavily weighted toward stage 3. The deep, slow-wave sleep, the physical restoration, the glymphatic cleaning. This is when the body does its most urgent repair work. It front-loads the restorative deep sleep. In the later cycles, the last 2 or 3, which encompass the final 3 to 4 hours of sleep, the balance shifts. Stage 3 becomes abbreviated or disappears entirely. The cycles become dominated by REM sleep, which expands to fill much of the 90-minute window. The final hour or 2 of a full 8-hour night may consist almost entirely of REM sleep. This has a profound implication that should give anyone who regularly cuts their sleep short, genuine pause. If you sleep 6 hours instead of 8, you are not simply losing 2 hours of uniform sleep. You are disproportionately losing the REM-rich final cycles. You are cutting off the portion of the night that contains the most dreaming, the most emotional processing, the most creative consolidation. You are performing a kind of neurological amputation on one of the most critical phases of your biology. And because the missing sleep is at the end of the night, the part you were most deeply in when the alarm fired, you may barely feel it as a loss. You may wake feeling adequately rested, unaware of the territory that was taken. The early restorative deep sleep means you wake from short sleep feeling physically okay, but the psychological and cognitive cost of lost REM accumulates. It shows in emotion regulation, in creative capacity, in the subtle resilience of the self across days and weeks of accumulated sleep debt. Sleep debt is real, and it compounds, and it is not fully repaid by a single long night. But that conversation is for another time. Right now, we are heading somewhere. We are heading into REM. REM, the land where you cannot move. Rapid eye movement sleep is one of the most strange and magnificent states of existence that the human brain enters. When the EEG was first applied to sleeping subjects in Asarinsky and Kleitman's laboratory in the 1950s, the discovery of REM was initially received with something close to disbelief. The brain during REM looked, on the graph, nearly indistinguishable from the brain during alert, engaged waking. The waves were fast, low amplitude, complex, precisely the signature of active consciousness. Yet the person was clearly asleep. They could not be easily awakened. They were not responding to the environment. How could a sleeping brain look so awake? The answer, which would take decades of research to fully understand, is that the brain during REM is not merely similar to the waking brain. In certain respects, it is more active than the waking brain. Regions associated with emotion, memory, and visual processing light up with extraordinary intensity. The limbic system, the ancient emotional core of the brain, runs at fever pitch. The amygdala, which processes emotion and emotional memory, shows activity levels during REM sleep that in some studies exceed its waking levels. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for logical evaluation, critical thinking, reality testing, and the inhibition of emotional responses is largely suppressed. Its activity drops to a fraction of waking levels. The cortical region that acts as a brake on the emotional brain is offline. This creates a very specific kind of mental environment. Emotion is maximally active. Logic and reality testing are minimally active. The visual system is generating experience without any input from the actual eyes. And something is taking all of this raw material, the emotion, the imagery, the released associative creativity, and weaving it into a narrative. This is the dream. Dreams in REM sleep are vivid, emotionally saturated, narrative, and often bizarre by the standards of waking logic. Impossible events occur without comment. People transform into other people. Places from different points in your life occupy the same space. Rules about how the world works are simply absent, and the dreaming mind does not notice their absence. The logical prefrontal cortex, which would normally raise its hand and point out that this is impossible, is not in the room. What is in the room is one of the most sophisticated emotional processing systems that biology has ever produced. What dreams actually do. For most of human history, dreams were understood as messages from gods, from the future, from the depths of the self. Every culture developed elaborate systems for the interpretation of dreams. The Mesopotamians had dream priests. Ancient Egyptians sent their sick to sleep in temples, specifically to receive healing dreams. The Hebrew Bible and the New Testament are filled with dreams that carry divine instruction. The Greek oracle at Delphi was consulted partly through the medium of sleep. Freud, at the turn of the 20th century, proposed a secular version of this framework. The dream has encoded message from the unconscious, revealing repressed wishes and conflicts through the disguise of symbol and narrative. The dream required interpretation. It was carrying information that the waking mind had hidden from itself. Modern neuroscience has moved on from Freud, but it has arrived at something that is, in its own way, equally remarkable. The current understanding of REM sleep and dreaming is that dreams are not random. They are not simply the result of a sleeping brain firing neurons in meaningless patterns. They are the output of an active, purposeful process of emotional memory, consolidation, and integration. The neuroscientist Matthew Walker, among others, has proposed what he calls the overnight therapy hypothesis. The idea is this: REM sleep allows the brain to revisit emotionally significant memories, including difficult, painful, or distressing experiences in a neurochemical environment that is fundamentally different from waking. Specifically, during REM sleep, the brain operates without the presence of noradrenaline, the neurochemical associated with stress, anxiety, and the acute stress response. Noradrenaline levels drop to essentially zero during REM sleep. This is the only state in the 24-hour cycle in which the brain operates at such low levels of this stress chemical. What this means is that during REM sleep, the brain can revisit emotionally charged memories, can reactivate the neural networks that hold those memories without the physiological stress response that those memories provoke during waking. It can, in a sense, examine the wound without causing further damage to the tissue. And over the course of this repeated, low noradrenaline reactivation, the emotional charge of the memory, the sting, the weight, the raw edge gradually diminishes. The memory is preserved, but the pain it carries is attenuated. The experience is integrated rather than isolated. It becomes part of the larger story rather than an intrusive fragment that keeps breaking through the surface. This is why a loss that feels unbearable on the day it occurs can feel, while still painful, somehow more survivable a week later. The factual memory has not changed. What has changed is its emotional charge, and the mechanism responsible for that change, at least in significant part, is the REM sleep that occurred between the experience and the present moment. There is supporting evidence for this in clinical populations. People with PTSD, whose condition involves the intrusion of highly charged traumatic memories into waking life, show disrupted REM sleep architecture. Specifically, they show evidence of elevated noradrenaline levels during REM, the very neurochemical whose absence is what makes normal REM sleep an opportunity for emotional attenuation. In PTSD, the normal REM environment is disturbed, and the nightmare that results is, in a sense, the same reactivation of emotional memory occurring without the usual protective, low noradrenaline environment. The brain is trying to process, but it is trying to process in the wrong chemistry. The wound keeps reopening rather than gradually closing. This understanding has led to one of the more promising pharmacological findings in PTSD treatment in recent years. A drug called prazosin, which blocks noradrenaline receptors, has shown benefit in reducing the nightmares of PTSD, precisely because it reduces the noradrenaline that disrupts the normal low noradrenaline environment of REM. It creates, pharmacologically, something approximating the neurochemistry that healthy REM sleep provides naturally. The dream is therapy. The dream is the brain doing, in the dark, what it cannot fully do in the light, processing the emotional residue of experience, strip mining it for meaning, attenuating its charge, integrating it into the broader architecture of who you are, REM and the creative brain. But emotional processing is not the only work of REM sleep. There is a second function, equally remarkable and perhaps even more counterintuitive, that has emerged from sleep research in recent decades. REM sleep makes you more creative. This is not a metaphor or an approximation. It is a specific, measurable, cognitive effect that has been demonstrated in laboratory conditions repeatedly. People who have been allowed adequate REM sleep compared to those who have been deprived specifically of REM show significantly greater performance on tasks that require creative problem solving, novel association making, and the integration of information across disparate domains. The reason is architectural. The waking brain, most of the time, is a tightly focused system. It processes the world through well-established pathways, makes predictions based on established patterns, and generally operates with high efficiency and low surprise. This is what makes it useful for navigating a complex, predictable world, but it comes at a cost. The tight focus also means a certain narrowness. The established pathways are preferred. Novel associations, connections between things that the brain has not previously linked, are harder to form, harder to surface, harder to hold. During REM sleep, the prefrontal inhibition is removed. The associative networks of the brain run free of executive control. The brain stops preferring its established pathways and begins casting a much wider net. Connections are made between things that waking cognition would have kept separated by logic, by category, by the simple linear demand of sequential thought. In REM, the rules of category and sequence are suspended. The dreaming brain is a radical associationist. connecting distantly related pieces of information by their emotional resonance or their structural similarity rather than their logical proximity. This is why the solutions to problems that have resisted waking analysis sometimes arrive fully formed in the morning, not because of magic, but because the REM brain, running its wide, unconstrained associative search across the entire stored library of the mind, found a connection that the waking brain's narrower, more rule-bound search had missed. The chemist Auguste Kekule famously described arriving at the ring structure of the benzene molecule through a dream of a snake biting its own tail. The mathematician Ramanujan attributed some of his most remarkable proofs to the Hindu goddess Mahalakshmi, who appeared to him in dreams and wrote equations on a scroll. Dmitri Mendeleev reported seeing the periodic table organized in the arrangement we now recognize in a dream. Paul McCartney heard the melody of Yesterday in a dream, woke up convinced it was a song he had heard somewhere, and gradually came to understand that his dreaming brain had composed it whole. These are not coincidences. They are the creative output of a brain state specifically characterized by the suspension of associative limits. REM sleep is, among other things, the brain's research and development department running its broadest, most unconstrained search, finding the connections that careful, logical analysis had not been able to discover. The circadian architecture, the clock, beneath the clock. We have been traveling through the internal architecture of sleep, the stages, the cycles, the biology, but there is a second architectural system governing your sleep that operates on a larger scale, the circadian rhythm. The word circadian comes from the Latin circa diem, approximately a day. It refers to the approximately 24-hour biological clock that exists in virtually every cell of your body, governing not just sleep and wakefulness, but a staggering range of biological processes: hormone release, body temperature, digestion, immune function, cell division, and dozens more. The circadian clock is not a metaphor. It is a molecular mechanism, a feedback loop of specific proteins encoded by specific genes that oscillates with approximately 24-hour periodicity. The master clock for the whole system lives in a tiny region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons, smaller than a grain of rice, that receives direct input from the retinal cells of the eye and uses light, specifically the blue spectrum light of daylight, to keep itself synchronized with the external world. Every morning, when light enters your eyes, a signal travels along a dedicated neural pathway directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The master clock is told. It is day. It begins its 24-hour oscillation approximately 16 hours later. As the light fades and darkness arrives, the clock begins releasing melatonin, the hormone that signals the approach of biological night, triggering the cascade of changes that prepare the body for sleep. This system is elegant and ancient. It evolved over hundreds of millions of years in organisms far simpler than us, because the rhythmic alternation of light and dark has been perhaps the most consistent feature of the environment for almost the entire history of life on Earth. The cellular clock is the organism's way of anticipating predictable changes in the environment rather than merely reacting to them. It is evolution's most fundamental act of preparation. But here is the point that is directly relevant to the night you are in right now. The relationship between the circadian clock and sleep is not one of simple cause and effect. The clock does not simply switch sleep on and off. It operates in a complex dance with a second system, the sleep pressure system, driven by the accumulation of a chemical called adenosine in the brain. Adenosine is a byproduct of neural activity. Every hour that your brain is awake and working, adenosine accumulates in the interstitial spaces of the brain. As it accumulates, it produces a progressively increasing sense of sleepiness, what researchers call sleep pressure or sleep drive. The longer you have been awake, the more adenosine has built up, and the more powerfully your brain is signaling its need for sleep. Caffeine, incidentally, works by blocking adenosine receptors, not by energizing the brain, but by preventing the brain from sensing how tired it is. The adenosine keeps accumulating behind the caffeine blockade. When the caffeine wears off, the accumulated adenosine floods the newly unblocked receptors all at once, which is why the post-caffeine crash can feel so sudden and steep. Sleep, specifically deep slow-wave sleep, clears adenosine from the brain. This is part of why deep sleep is so restorative. It is not merely that the body repairs itself, it is that the chemical signal of accumulated tiredness is actually removed from the system, allowing you to wake with a genuinely reset sleep drive rather than simply a temporarily suppressed one. The circadian rhythm and the adenosine sleep drive work in concert. The circadian clock helps mask the growing sleep pressure during the day, keeping you alert even as adenosine builds. In the evening, as the circadian signal shifts and melatonin begins to rise, the masking effect lessens and the accumulated sleep pressure becomes fully felt. You become sleepy, and the two systems align to create the conditions for sleep. Understanding this dual system explains something that many people experience but cannot account for. The second wind, the curious surge of alertness that sometimes arrives in the evening, around 9 or 10 o'clock, just when you had been feeling genuinely ready for sleep. This is the circadian clock reaching the peak of its wake-promoting signal before it finally begins its descent toward biological night. If you miss this window, if you push through the second wind and stay awake past the point when the circadian signal has turned, you will often find yourself lying in the dark, genuinely tired, but somehow not able to fall asleep. The moment has passed. The window has closed. This is the biology of the night. It is not arbitrary. It is architecture. What we steal from ourselves, there is a conversation we need to have in the middle of this long journey through the night about the thing that most people are doing to their sleep without understanding the full consequences. Modern human beings, in almost every industrialized society on Earth, are chronically and significantly sleep deprived. This is not a peripheral issue or a minor inconvenience. The data are unambiguous and they are alarming. In 1942, Gallup polling found that the average American slept 7.9 hours per night. By 2013, that average had fallen to 6.5 hours, a decline of 90 minutes in 70 years. 90 minutes, multiplied across an entire society, multiplied across every night of every year. The accumulated deficit is staggering. The World Health Organization has declared a global sleep deprivation epidemic. The Centers for Disease Control have classified insufficient sleep as a public health crisis. Researchers who study sleep spend significant portions of their working lives trying to communicate the urgency of findings that they believe are among the most important discoveries in modern medicine, and the audience largely does not hear them. There is a cultural framework, particularly prominent in certain professional environments, that treats short sleep as a virtue, as evidence of drive, dedication, and toughness. the executive who boasts of sleeping 5 hours, the medical resident who wears 72-hour shifts as a badge of distinction, the startup culture that equates wakefulness with ambition. This framework has a long cultural history and a significant body of social reinforcement. It is also, by every measure of neuroscience we have, profoundly wrong. After 16 hours of continuous wakefulness, cognitive performance begins to decline measurably. After 17 hours, the level of cognitive impairment is equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. After 24 hours without sleep, cognitive impairment is equivalent to a blood alcohol level of approximately 0.1% above the legal driving limit in most jurisdictions. But the cruelest aspect of this impairment is that it is invisible to the person experiencing it. Studies comparing self-assessed performance with objective performance show a consistent and disturbing pattern. As sleep deprivation progresses, the gap between how impaired you are and how impaired you believe yourself to be grows steadily wider. The sleep-deprived person loses, along with their cognitive capacity, the capacity to accurately assess their cognitive capacity. They feel fine, they are not fine, and the chronic, moderate sleep restriction that most people live with 6 hours a night for a week or 5 hours for 3 nights produces impairments that are essentially equivalent to total sleep deprivation of 1 or 2 nights, but that feel more tolerable because they accrue gradually and the baseline shifts downward. You become accustomed to impairment. You call it normal. It is not normal. It is what deprived looks like when you can no longer remember what rested feels like. The good news, the genuinely hopeful part of this conversation, is that the biology of sleep is profoundly forgiving in both directions. The same system that accumulates debt can, with attention and consistency, be restored. The glymphatic system that has not been fully running will begin to run. The REM cycles that were cut short will, given the opportunity, extend and deepen. The sleep-deprived brain, offered sufficient, consistent sleep, will adapt and recover with a responsiveness that is almost generous. The body wants to sleep. It is designed to sleep. It has a system of almost incomprehensible sophistication that exists for the sole purpose of doing what you are doing right now. The only obstacle, in most cases, is the choices that the waking world extracts from us, and the understanding that those choices have costs that are real, measurable, and cumulative, dreaming across the lifespan. Before we reach the end of this night's journey, there is one more dimension of the architecture of sleep that deserves its own light. Sleep is not static across the human lifespan. The architecture of the night changes profoundly as we age, and the changes are not random. They track the changing needs of a brain at different stages of development and maintenance in ways that illuminate both what sleep is doing and why. Begin at the beginning. A newborn infant sleeps approximately 16 to 17 hours per day. This is not because the newborn is fragile or inefficient at waking. It is because the newborn brain has an almost unimaginable amount of construction to do. At birth, the human brain is approximately 25% of its adult size. In the first year of life, it will grow to approximately 75% of adult size. Billions of synaptic connections are being formed. The myelination of neural pathways, the process of wrapping nerve fibers in the fatty insulating sheath that allows electrical signals to travel at full speed, is underway, but far from complete. The brain is being built, and the primary workspace for that construction is sleep. Specifically, the newborn brain spends approximately 50% of its total sleep time in REM sleep. 50%. Compared to the adult's 20 to 25%, this extraordinary proportion of REM in infant sleep is not coincidental. The current understanding is that REM sleep plays a critical role in the development of the neural architecture, that the brain activity of REM somehow drives or supports the formation of synaptic connections and the maturation of neural circuits. The dreaming infant brain is building itself. As the child grows, the proportion of REM sleep gradually decreases, and the proportion of deep, slow-wave sleep becomes relatively more prominent. The building phase transitions toward the maintenance phase. The construction crew hands off to the janitorial staff. In adolescence, the circadian clock undergoes a significant shift that has profound practical implications. The phase of the circadian rhythm, the timing of biological day and night, shifts markedly later during puberty. The biological clock of a 15-year-old is running on a schedule approximately 2 hours later than the clock of a 10-year-old or an adult. This is not a behavioral choice. It is not laziness. It is a genuine, measurable, hormonally driven shift in the timing of the circadian system. What this means is that a teenager whose circadian clock is set to feel sleepy at 11 or midnight cannot simply decide to fall asleep at 9. The biology will not cooperate. And when that teenager is required to be at school at 7:30 in the morning, the result is chronic partial sleep deprivation during precisely the years when the brain is undergoing its final, the critical phase of development, the pruning and refinement of neural connections that defines adult cognitive capacity. The early school start time is, from the perspective of neuroscience, a decision to systematically deprive adolescent brains of sleep during a critical developmental window. In older adulthood, the architecture of sleep changes again. Deep, slow-wave sleep becomes harder to achieve and less robust when it occurs. The brain generates fewer and smaller delta waves. The glymphatic system, whose activity is driven by deep sleep, may become less fully activated. REM sleep remains present, though its architecture changes. The circadian clock loses some of its amplitude. The sharp distinction between the wake-promoting and sleep-promoting phases becomes less pronounced, and the ability to sleep deeply and consistently may diminish. This is one of the reasons that sleep disturbance is so common in older adults, and one of the reasons it matters so much. The brain that is most at risk from the accumulation of amyloid and tau, the brain in its later decades, is precisely the brain that is having the most difficulty achieving the deep sleep that drives the glymphatic clearance of those same proteins. This is a cruel biological irony, and it is one of the most compelling arguments for treating sleep as a priority throughout life, rather than waiting until the cost of the deficit has been fully tallied. The architecture around you, we have traveled through the interior of sleep, through the stages, the cycles, the biological mechanisms, the dreaming mind. But there is an outer architecture that shapes all of this, one that is often overlooked because it is so ordinary that it becomes invisible. The environment of sleep, the bedroom, the temperature, the light, the sound, the associations that the space carries, all of these are processed by the brain in ways that either support or undermine the transition into sleep. The brain does not switch off the moment you lie down. It assesses the environment continuously, making a judgment about safety and suitability for sleep that runs largely beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Temperature is one of the most powerful environmental regulators of sleep. The transition into sleep is accompanied by a drop in core body temperature of approximately 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. This drop is not incidental. It is part of the mechanism. The body initiates sleep in part by redirecting blood flow to the hands and feet, which is why you often feel warm in the extremities just before falling asleep in order to radiate heat from the body's surface and reduce core temperature. A sleeping environment that is too warm interferes with this process at the most fundamental level. The optimal ambient temperature for sleep, research consistently suggests, is approximately 18 to 19 degrees Celsius, substantially cooler than most people keep their living spaces during the day. Light is the most powerful environmental input to the circadian clock, and artificial light, particularly the blue spectrum light emitted by screens and LED lighting, has essentially the same effect on the suprachiasmatic nucleus as daylight. Exposure to bright artificial light in the 2 to 3 hours before sleep delays the onset of melatonin release, effectively telling the biological clock that it is still afternoon. The result is a delayed circadian phase, difficulty falling asleep, and if the wake time is fixed by the alarm clock, a truncated sleep that cuts disproportionately into the REM-rich final cycles. Sound matters in ways that are more nuanced than simple noise reduction. The sleeping brain, as we noted earlier, continues to monitor the auditory environment and make judgments about threat. Sounds that the brain has learned to associate with safety: the steady hum of a fan, the predictable sound of rain, the white or pink noise that contains no information and therefore demands no evaluation, can actually support sleep by providing a consistent auditory background that renders intermittent, potentially alerting sounds less salient. The fan or the noise machine is not masking sounds so much as it is providing the sleeping brain with a stable, low information, auditory environment in which the K-complex mechanism can do its job of managing minor disturbances without escalating to waking. The association the brain carries for a particular space is also powerful. The brain is a prediction machine. It uses past experience to generate expectations about what will happen in any given context. If the bedroom is a space where you work, where you watch stressful content, where you lie awake worrying, the brain's prediction for what happens in that space is not sleep, it is wakefulness, alertness, or stress. The association undermines the transition. Sleep clinicians recommend what they call stimulus control, using the bedroom exclusively for sleep and sex, so that the brain builds a clean, consistent association between the environment and the state of sleep. The space becomes a cue. The body begins to prepare for sleep the moment it enters the space, because the space has become reliably associated with sleep. The prediction becomes self-fulfilling. All of this, the temperature, the light, the sound, the association, is the outer architecture, the stage on which the inner architecture performs. Getting the stage right does not guarantee the performance, but getting it wrong consistently prevents it. The edge of the night, we have come a long way through the architecture of sleep. We have stood at the threshold of stage 1, where the first images form in the dissolving light of waking. We have moved through stage 2, where the sleeping brain files its papers and guards the door. We have descended into the deep, slow wave country of stage 3, where the body mends itself in growth hormone and the glymphatic system runs its flood through the channels of the brain. We have ascended into the electrical storm of REM, where the dreaming mind processes the emotional residue of the day and finds the creative connections that logic left unfound. We have seen the 90-minute cycle that runs through the night 5 or 6 times, shifting its balance from deep sleep to REM as the hours progress. We have understood the circadian clock ticking beneath all of it, the master timer that has been synchronized to the rhythm of the earth for hundreds of millions of years. We have looked at the lifespan of sleep, from the construction of the infant brain to the maintenance challenges of older age. We have considered the environment that holds all of this, the temperature, the light, the sound, the association, and perhaps, in the journey through all of this, something has shifted in you. Perhaps the dark and quiet around you feels less like an absence and more like a presence. Not the absence of day, but the presence of something that has its own purpose, its own work, its own extraordinary architecture. You are not waiting for morning. You are doing something that the waking, narrating part of you cannot access or oversee, something that your body knows how to do with a competence so absolute that it has kept you alive every night of your life without your help. Your brain knows how to descend through the stages. It knows how to generate the spindles and the K-complexes. It knows how to produce the delta waves that activate the glymphatic system. It knows how to enter REM and do the emotional processing and creative integration that you will benefit from tomorrow without knowing it happened. It knows the whole architecture. It has always known it. The conscious mind, with its 50 bits per second, its narrating and deliberating and worrying, is not needed for this. This is the domain of the 95%. This is where the autopilot earns its keep. Your job, right now, is simply to get out of the way. The long exhale. There is a quality of surrender that is unique to the approach of sleep. It is different from any other kind of letting go that you perform during the day. When you stop working on a problem, there is still a part of you holding it, turning it over in the background. When you rest your body, the mind often runs on. When you set something down, some part of you marks where it is, maintains its location in the map of your attention. But the letting go of sleep is total. It requires a kind of trust so fundamental that it operates entirely below the level of decision. You do not decide to trust your body to breathe while you sleep. You do not remind yourself before unconsciousness takes you to keep the heart beating. The systems that will sustain you through the night are not subject to conscious instruction or conscious worry. They simply run. This is the deepest level at which the subconscious holds you, not just managing your habits and your intuitions and the automatic architecture of your behavior, but keeping you alive, managing the biological machinery that consciousness rides on, without which there would be nothing left to think or feel or narrate. The trust required for sleep is the oldest trust there is. It predates reason. It predates language. It predates the capacity to evaluate whether sleep is safe or sensible or well-timed. Long before the human brain had the machinery to deliberate, it had the machinery to sleep, and the machinery has worked every single night through the entire evolutionary history of our species. It knows what to do with the night. It has done this before. It will do it well. Let your body settle into the surface beneath it. Feel the weight of it, distributed across the points of contact with the bed. Let that weight belong to the surface rather than to you. Let the surface hold it. Feel the rhythm of your breathing, not to control it. The body knows its own rhythm better than the conscious mind could ever manage. Just feel it. The rise, the pause, the fall, the brief moment of rest between breaths. Each breath, a cycle. Each cycle, a small surrender. The thoughts that arise, let them arrive without being met. They will come. The mind does not go quiet immediately or easily, but they do not require a response. They do not require you to follow them, resolve them, organize them, or hold them. They can arrive and pass like weather, like clouds moving across the sky of your attention. You do not need to chase them, and you do not need to push them away. Simply notice that they arose and return gently, without reproach to the weight of your body and the rhythm of your breath. The thinking mind is not your enemy. It is simply not needed for this. It has done its work today. Let it set down its tools. The deep sleep will come. The slow delta waves will organize across your cortex. The glymphatic channels will widen. The cerebrospinal fluid will begin its pulsing, washing flood through the spaces of the brain, carrying away the day. The spindles will fire, uploading the day's memories to their long-term locations. The first pulse of growth hormone will move through your blood, beginning the cellular repair that will make tomorrow's body slightly better than today's. And then, in the later hours, the dreaming will come. The REM mind will take up the emotional residue of the day, the unresolved feelings, the difficult moments, the quiet joys that did not quite get their due in the busyness of living, and will do something with them in the dark. Will process them without the cortical break. Will let the associative mind find the meanings that the linear waking mind could not reach. When you wake, you may not remember this. You will probably not know what the night did. You will simply find yourself on the other side of it, in the morning that always waits, feeling, if the architecture was allowed to run, like a version of yourself that has been held and restored. The night is long, and the night is capable, and the night is on your side. All you have to do is enter it. Good night.